Could Kamala Harris's new role overseeing gun violence prevention lead to an expansion of controversial red flag laws? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by AMP America. Very excited to be part of the AMP America team. If you're looking for news articles, opinion pieces, and more without the corporate media fluff or nonsense, head over to ampamerica.com. It's pretty darn awesome, if I do say so myself, namely because I'm writing an opinion piece there at least once a week. So one more time, ampamerica.com. Also, the Brian Nichols Show, powered by Cardio Miracle, yours truly powered by Cardio Miracle. And folks, I got to tell you, I've been using Cardio Miracle, yes, for a year now. Let's go ahead and get the confetti blasting off in the background. But the Cardio Miracle difference, 1000% real. With a secret ingredient of nitric oxide, Cardio Miracle has helped lower my blood pressure. It's helped give me a better pump at the gym, more restful night's sleep, all that and more. And I got to tell you, I want you, being members of the Brian Nichols Show audience, to experience the Cardio Miracle difference for yourselves. Now, I know for a fact that literally hundreds of you have already experienced the difference. You've gone ahead, you use code TBNS at checkout for 15% off your order. But I also know that the 100 plus of you guys out there who have been using code TBNS also know that you're getting 100% money back guarantee. So you have nothing to lose except for, yes, that pesky high blood pressure and all the other negative things that come with a not so great heart. So go to your show notes, or if you're watching the video of the show, head down below in the video description. Link will be found there for your exclusive code for 15% off your order. Yes, the Cardio Miracle difference is 100% real. So go to cardiomiracle.com, place your order today. Your heart will thank you. All right, folks, going into today's episode, we're talking red flag laws. We're talking Kamala Harris, and we're talking all things Second Amendment. To help me do that today, from We the Female, Kerry Slone. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Thank you. May I give you a compliment on your incredible impersonation of her laugh? That was disturbingly good.
Yeah, Kamala, she does a really good job. You know, school buses, they're magical, they're big, they're yellow. They get kids from point A to point B. We have to invest in school buses. It's something like that usually.
Did you see the Sheila Jackson Lee about the big ball of gas and the gases? And I was like, when did Kamala Harris start doing Toastmaster meetings for Congress? Because that's what it sounded like.
And then you got Sunny over at The View. She's telling everybody that whenever you have cicadas and eclipses and, you know, things that you can actually plan for by math, that is indicative of climate change. Beware. Kerry Slone, welcome to the show. Introduce yourself here to the audience. And what is We the Female?
Thanks for having me. And I've confronted Kamala Harris in the past, so I have a personal affinity for wanting to insult her. I'm just going to be straight about it. So We the Female is a nonprofit organization that I created coming up on 7 years ago that was created out of necessity, not only for helping women learn how to embrace self-defense, but also helping them understand how self-defense laws, gun laws in particular, negatively impact their ability to protect themselves and their babies. So in short, we like to say that We the Female's entire mission is to arm the women with education, confidence, and self-defense.
I love that, because here at the show, we like to talk about educating, enlightening, and informing. Yeah. So you're same church, different pew, but I think, and by the way, we've had a few ladies here in the show in more recent months. Most recently, I think it was Alicia Garcia from the great state of Colorado, talking about the importance of women being able to defend themselves. And we went through, you know, the litany of reasons of why women need to be able to protect themselves, namely if you're defending yourself against, a ginormous human being, or, you're finding yourself in a very dangerous situation. There are absolutely, times when women need to be armed. I mean, heck, I'm going to say all the time, if you're a lady out there, make sure you're able to defend yourself. But we start talking about red flag laws, Carrie, and for the audience, they might not be familiar with red flag laws, because these really didn't come into the traditional conversation when it comes to gun control until more recently, right? Probably 2018 or so, when this conversation really took over. And it was saying, okay, well, let's say if we find someone who might be a threat to themselves, to others, we're going to put them on a red flag list, right? Where a law enforcement officer will come to the house, say, hey, you've been deemed a red flag threat. We're going to collect your firearms. And then until we're comfortable with you not being a threat anymore, we'll give them back. Why is this a big danger, not just to women's rights, but across the board, Carrie? Why is this an issue when it looks at the Second Amendment and possible violations of liberties?
Yeah, it's a can of worms that a lot of people don't realize actually predates even 2018. The first official red flag law was put in place in 1999 in Connecticut after a lottery building shooting.
Snap. I thought it was not until Trump. So this has actually been in our political discourse for 25 years?
It has. But here's what's interesting is, technically speaking, red flag laws themselves existed prior to an official law with a name on it, typically called ERPO, or Extreme Risk Protection Order. Different states have different vernacular, but generally the common term, red flag law. They've kind of been in place unofficially for as long as we could probably imagine. Cops or family members could petition courts. It just wasn't a law. So now that they've put these things in law, it's kind of changed the dynamic, but it's also given more power to the court system over somebody, and especially in some cases, in a lot of cases actually, without that person even being in court to represent themselves. And that's one of the biggest concerns. But a lot of the unforeseen circumstances that surround red flag laws happen to be with domestic violence victims. Red flag laws were put in place, to protect people. And obviously the first people that we think about are veterans, right? Veterans was one of the big ones, school shootings, these type of things. But they're commonly used. And one of the first places that they were put in place in more recent years was in the Violence Against Women Act for domestic violence. In fact, the red flag laws that for domestic violence tie into the law, or the regulation in the Federal Violence Against Women Act that says if an individual is convicted, has a felonious conviction of domestic violence, they're permanently banned from owning guns. So that starts with domestic violence restraining orders. So I'm a domestic violence survivor. When I stood in front of law enforcement officers 16 years ago with fingerprints around my throat from being picked up from my throat and thrown around the room, I had broken teeth, I hadn't eaten in days. The law enforcement officers asked me if I had a place to hide when my abuser was being released after his arraignment. And I was confused by that. I didn't understand why. And they said, well, that's because the chances of violence increasing is significant and highly likely once he's let out of jail, because clearly in the minds of the abuser, it's my fault he went to jail. Right. So interestingly enough, those cops at that time knew that restraining order that they were going to put in place wasn't going to protect me. But instead of teaching me or encouraging me to learn how to defend myself with a gun or any other means, but a gun is in my personal opinion, and I think a very commonly accepted one, it is the most effective self-defense tool for a woman, especially when we're talking about disproportionate size with an assailant.
Carrie, to that point, right? Like, yeah. I'm 6'5". I'm 265. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I'm gonna almost guarantee you're not 265. You're not 6'4", 6'5". So
I identify that as that though.
Does that work?
Maybe it's just my mouth. I kind of have the mouth. I'm a little mouthy.
But like that's the exact breakdown though of like a real life situation, right? You got monster of a man like me, petite female like you. There is absolutely a power disparity here, and at the end of the day, a firearm is the ultimate equalizer.
It is, and that was the cops were conveniently they didn't tell me that, but they told me to hide. And one of the big talking points, I kind of want to bring this up because a lot of people have heard the talking point on the gun control advocate side that a domestic violence victim is 5 times more likely to die if there is a gun in the home. Well, I have that study, and I'm happy to link that for you for your notes later. That exact study that says that's actually 30 years old. First and foremost, it doesn't actually say that the victim dies by firearm, because typically when she's still home in that situation, she doesn't, and that's a whole other conversation. But the very next paragraph in that same study says a domestic violence victim is more likely to survive if she's left her abuser and has a firearm. It is the next paragraph in that study, but conveniently, gun grabbers don't add that little tidbit in because they only share each other's talking points. I can guarantee you nobody's ever actually read that study that talk about that, because it's got information in it that they don't want you obviously to know. And obviously the cops knew that restraining order wasn't going to help me, yet they weren't willing to share with me information that could have given me something that could have protected me while he was stalking, because I ended up being stalked afterward, which is also common.
So let's go through, so believe it or not, Carrie, I do prep for these shows. I know people usually think I just sit down and I start talking, but I actually do homework for this. So I went through.
There's a lot of work for a podcast. I admire you.
Thanks. Yeah. I have a lefty friend, and he's all on board with red flag laws. And I said, hey, buddy, just do me a solid and give me your best arguments for red flag laws. Like just the best arguments you could. Here's what he presented to me. I want to hear what your thoughts are as I quickly read through these. So number one, he said it prevents gun violence and saves lives. The primary objective of red flag laws is to temporarily remove firearms from individuals who pose a threat to themselves or others, and potentially prevents mass shootings, suicides, and other acts of violence. Even if it's only a small percentage of orders that being taken for red flag laws, it can save lives. That was one. Go ahead, respond. I want to hear it.
Okay, so there is countless amounts of data and statistics and stories out there. Unfortunately, the pro-gun side isn't as well funded as the anti-gun side for putting all that research together. I worked for an organization called Crime Prevention Research Center briefly, and there's some data there. But for example, there was a story in what was the name of the city? Doesn't matter. It was Washington State many years ago, where a woman left her abuser, and he was red flagged under the domestic violence restraining order, under the Violence Against Women Act. And he had what we like to call the trifecta of protection for victims, or the victim did. The abuser was red flagged and had his firearms taken away from him. She had a domestic violence restraining order against him. Therefore, he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her or come anywhere near her. And she was sitting in the parking lot of her children's elementary school, a gun-free zone. So she had the trifecta of protection that was put in place by legislation. He obtained a firearm and shot her through the window, killing her while her children were in the back seat in the parking lot right after Thanksgiving. So there's just one of many examples out there that show you that, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, if somebody really wants to get a gun to commit an act of violence, they're going to get the gun whether they are under an order to turn them in or not. More importantly, we've seen time and time again with many of these school shooters that law enforcement, even the FBI in some cases, the Parkland shooter and the Uvalde shooter, they knew about these kids and they did nothing. So instead of trying to enact more laws or push for stricter laws, enhancing the laws that are already in place, why aren't we just enforcing the laws that are already there? And by enforcing those laws, why aren't we keeping these guys in jail? Why are we doing this catch and release business and letting them back out to reoffend when there is protections in place that would keep these offenders in jail?
Well, this goes to probably point 2, according to my buddy, and that is, because red flag laws, Carrie, are supposed to be temporary, and targeted. He says that red flag orders are supposed to be temporary, typically lasting between a few weeks to a year. And the targeted individuals are usually folks who, to our point earlier, exhibit dangerous behaviors rather than just a blanket gun ban. So it's allowing intervention periods, but also being respectful of gun rights. But to your point, maybe it's missing a few other loose ends, i.e. if somebody is, having the intent to cause harm, they're going to cause harm.
I'm so glad you brought that up. What it also does in those cases is those types of orders can actually be used against people and domestic violence victims in particular. They can be used against a domestic violence victim by their abuser in several different ways. But first and foremost, if there are firearms in the home that are owned by a victim. I know one personally. She is a firearms instructor in California. She left her abuser, and it was a very ugly situation. Good old boys club. He was a fireman in the small town that they lived in. And so, of course, he was buddies with all the cops. He had her red flagged and had all of her firearms removed out of spite and malice so she couldn't earn a living. But then he started stalking her and starting verbally abusing her, to which we know that verbal abuse usually ends up in some sort of physical violence, especially if there was a history of it, which he had. So he used that law against her to disarm her, not only to in her case, to financially hurt her, but to also make her vulnerable. I've got several cases of women where abuse victims, where red flag laws have been used against them. Furthermore, those types of laws, and that's kind of what happened to me. It wasn't really a red flag law, but what threw me in all of this was 7 years ago now, back in Washington State, there was a law called I-1639. Some people may have heard of it. It came out right after the Parkland shooting. And it was a law that there was a lot of stuff in it, but the one thing that was in it that nobody talked about, and unfortunately ended up getting passed, is when you sign the 4473, which is that little form that gun control supporters think doesn't exist. It's a federal background check for firearm purchases. Spoiler alert, you are actually checked out. And how many of those are actually false positive, that's a whole other conversation that we could get into. Like you could have all these different segments on gun control with this kind of stuff with people that understand policy. So in Washington State, you can be denied the purchase of a firearm based on what they see in your medical record. Because when you sign that 4473 in Washington State, it's a waiver of your medical record so that the state health authority, whoever they are, gets to look at your medical record and determine that. So I know the question that's going to be on a lot of people's mind, well, what is it? Because I get that from my from my students in my firearm classes all the time. This is usually what gets centrist to left-leaning women, because the left-leaning women will come and they'll take handgun classes, right? It's the ARs they want banned, which I can usually change their mind on that too. But they go, well, wait a minute. I took antidepressants 10 years ago for whatever. I took sleep medication. I said, well, guess what? You could be denied. I said, when you go to buy your first gun, you potentially could be denied the purchase of a gun. And then those are now tied to their red flag law in that state. So that's what threw me into this. I said, for those of you that voted for this, you just put me in a position where I may not be able to purchase a firearm to protect myself from the man that you all know is stalking me, because they were my friends. So those laws can also be used against abuse victims. And more importantly, and to me, what's even more concerning, is you're going to see people, and we see this in the veteran community bigly, to quote Donald Trump, bigly, is they will not go and get the health care, particularly the mental health care that they need, because they don't want to end up on a list. And so two of the biggest pawns for, well, three, but PTSD, right? That's, everybody associates that with veterans, but arguably, it depends on the study you read, the next demographic is actually abuse victims and abuse survivors that have that.
So Carrie, you mentioned something here, and it goes right to the third point that he said that you've actually, I think, pretty much dismantled. And that was because red flag laws have due process protections. He said red flag laws typically include due process safeguards, like requiring evidence of a credible threat, a court hearing, and the ability to appeal an order. So it's balancing public safety concerns while also protecting civil liberties. But I mean, in the story you articulated, where a fireman was able to get all of his buddies on board and was able to red flag his significant other, his ex-significant other, that doesn't seem to be really the case, does it?
Yeah. And so not only that, but it depends on how the laws are written in the different states. I do talks on red flag laws all over the country. And different states have different criteria, and California has actually passed a law where it's not just the law enforcement that can request it, but families can too. And just because somebody may have PTSD in their medical record doesn't necessarily mean that they're suicidal. In fact, we have data that shows that number one, that restraining orders don't actually keep women from being murdered, abuse victims being murdered. But we also have data showing that just because you take somebody's guns away from them doesn't mean that they're not going to commit suicide. In other words, there's no actual significant change of statistics for the rate of the suicide numbers, whether they have a gun or not. So in other words, the layman term of that, they're going to find a way to do it, whether they have a gun or not, essentially. So that is the biggest concern. And so a lot of people don't think about that. And one of the ways that I'm actually able to crack that is people don't think about that. But here's what's interesting. So a lot of these people, they kind of out themselves about the justification of due process, because just direct them to the Rahimi case, right? The Rahimi case was a Supreme Court case recently that was heard, and it's being heard as a Second Amendment right. And that's in itself as its own issue, which that's a huge can of worms. We should revisit that when they come out with the opinion on that, because that's depending on how they rule, they may have to go back and revisit Bruin. But how that whole ball got rolling with him is, look, let me be clear. That dude is not the dude that gun owners want representing him. He is a little bit of a piece of shit, just saying. That being said, one of the things that got his gut, so the case is all about him being able to own guns as somebody who has convictions. But I'm trying to keep this quick and short for y'all for brevity, but the conviction wasn't domestic violence. The conviction was for being in possession of firearms under a domestic violence restraining order. Interestingly enough, a restraining order that was issued to him by the court without him being present to defend himself. Right? Yeah, exactly. So, and now look, like I said, dude's a piece of shit, right? But, based on the evidence that we see, the victim going to court and asking for the restraining order was justified for the reasons that she did. So, but he was not there, had no representation in court, which is common with red flag laws. Most states that have red flag laws, the person that's being red flagged doesn't have to be present to be heard, right? Exactly. So that's a due process issue in itself. And that's where I get a lot of flack as a domestic violence survivor. I'm an absolutionist. Like, I took all kinds of heat over the illegal alien thing, right? Because I'm a historian. I'm married to a historian. We're big on Constitution and understanding it at its core. And to me, there's no such thing as a gun law that's ever going to be good. They don't exist. And I believe that even felons should have their gun rights restored, because again, if the system's working, they should be in jail or, taken out back after they're convicted and put in a wood chipper. But so the people don't realize that when they get to, this protects, they go through this process, and so they get to protect their rights. More often than not, the individual that's being red flagged either by the cops, law enforcement, or the families, they're not present to get to defend themselves or to give their side of the story. So the stories are only going with whatever credible threat is given. It's usually anecdotal or one isolated incident, as opposed to looking at the big picture, because we all know that the courts don't really have time to sit and actually weed through what it is. So they go with the better safe than sorry, especially if they're anti-gun, right? The judges, and they're automatically going to issue those and take away somebody's due process, which is absolutely unacceptable, as well as putting people in danger. Because at the end of the day, Brian, here's the deal. It's not my responsibility or your responsibility or the court or anybody else's or government's responsibility to decide who should get a gun and who shouldn't. It's our responsibility to be better trained to defend ourselves than the people that want to do us harm.
Here, Carrie. Well, I hate to say this. We're already hard pressed for time. I don't know where the heck these conversations go. So, Carrie, you know what that means. Since we
Yeah.
obviously left a lot of meat in the bone here, this is going to be part one of a conversation. So,
Okay.
we have an open invite to come back on. I know we really need to dig into more of this.
Sure.
But how about this? As we're going towards the tail end of today's conversation, any loose ends, anything that we neglected to talk about today that you want to make sure that the audience walks away from this episode feeling that they, were in fact educated and enlightened and informed? Carrie, what did we miss?
So I think most importantly, what I think that you really need to understand, if it wasn't already, apparent, is that women are statistically disproportionately and negatively impacted by gun control laws. We are definitely more to benefit when we're able to defend ourselves with a firearm, because it is, to coin the corny phrase that's out there, it is the best equalizer available for women. And when we look at politicians and we look at the gun control debate, they've weaponized women against their own best interests, because who primarily supports gun control? Women, right? Moms Demand, Grandma's Demand, all of these, Everytown. These are primarily women-run organizations or women-led. They have literally convinced women to support laws that are against their own best interests. And it is my hope to help women, no matter what side of the spectrum of politics that they're on, to understand that gun rights are women's rights. And it is absolutely the best way you can defend yourself from anybody that wants to hurt you.
All right, Carrie, we are with that going to go towards our final thoughts for today. And I'll kick things off if you're cool with that. I look at conversations that we're having today, that we've been having here on the show, as it goes towards specifically not just civil liberties, but when we're really laser focusing here on the 2A conversation, right? We have to, I think, and this is for us on our side of the aisle, we have to get out of the sexualization, I guess, of guns, right? Like we have to stop this like guns are sexy culture. I see it a lot, and I get it. Like, hey, ladies, you got to flaunt it. You're going to shoot, an AK-47 and you want to wear those tight shorts and stuff. Go for it. It's going to get some clicks. I get it. But when you're talking to your average person and they're hearing this dialogue, that does not work. They get turned off by that, because to the point you raised earlier, people just by and large want to feel safe and secure, right? They don't be the asshole. Right. Don't be the asshole going into Walmart carrying like completely loaded up in body armor, right? Because you're now putting more negative on the pro 2A camp than just by being a normal human being, right? Conceal carry, open carry, whatever it may be, but don't go in looking like you're about to take on an entire battalion of troops, right? Like we have to use some judgment here. And I look at the larger movement that we have here on the right, which there are folks like you who are going out and you're trying to, especially from a policy perspective, make some really like big, important changes for the better. But on the other side, I see, the people who do want to glorify guns for them being guns. And listen, that's not to say if you enjoy guns, you have a hobby of collecting guns. Like I like to shoot, I collect guns. I understand the importance of guns. I have a family that hunts. I get it. I understand it. I embrace it. I live it. But I'm not going out decked out like I'm about to go into, a combat zone. We have to use judgment. And if we don't use judgment, all it's doing is giving arguments to the other side to say, look at these nut jobs. They want to go to Walmart decked out in, full-on police battle armor while you and your kid are trying to shop for groceries for the week. That's the argument they make. And guess what? Emotionally, it wins. So we have to do better and get out of our own way, start telling more stories like the stories Carrie told today, but also stop doing the thing. Stop trying to make the gun culture more of a glorified, sexy gun culture, and make it what it's supposed to be, an absolute worst case last resort to defend yourself, your family, or a loved one, whatever it may be. But understand that it is a worst case last resort, not a, shoot first, wasn't that fun, ask questions later. That's my final thoughts. Carrie, what do you have for us? And of course, where can folks go ahead and support you in the amazing work that We Are Female are doing?
Well, I'm definitely very, like I said, I don't want to infringe on anybody's right to carry how they choose to carry. I'll leave it at this. I have really nice firearms. I don't want people knowing what I own, right? It's nobody's business, number one. Number two, if in the unlikely event, because it's really unlikely for you to actually be involved in a mass shooting, I don't want to be the first target, by people seeing what I'm carrying. So, I of course support concealed carry and clandestine. Trying to be that to coin the corny phrase, or to repeat it, the gray man kind of a thing, right? You don't want people to be obvious, but the average woman in America doesn't care about that. She doesn't care about the shall not be infringed Second Amendment. She cares about protecting herself and her babies. And so if we really want to bring them in, you're right, there needs to be a shift in the conversation about how we approach these women. I'm telling you, we've seen this time and again. The Democrats have clearly shown this. You get the women on board and watch what kind of changes start to happen, because the shift comes quick when you can see women starting to push back. We're seeing it on the more conservative side of the schools now, right? So get the women involved, and we have to change the conversations about guns, like you said, and about how we approach women. And that's exactly what my organization does. And you can find more information about my organization at wethefemale.net. You can find me on as they say down here in the South, the Facebooks at We the Female, and Instagram at WeTheFemale_official. And if you want to see the spicier side of Kerry Slone, you can find me Stilettos and Shotguns and the real _SNS on X, not Twitter. I got to get in the habit of that.
And this is where I bring in my, we're really looking forward to that, Carrie.
That'd be great.
Isn't it wonderful? All right, no
you
more
do
Kamala
a better
Harris.
impression of me, which I can't decide is amusing or disturbing or both.
A little bit of both, yeah. No more Kamala Harris for today's episode. We want to end this episode on a smile. So with that being said, folks, yes, please go ahead, support Carrie, support all the amazing work that We Are Female are doing. All those links are going to be found here in the show notes. And as for me, where can you find yours truly? Find me at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Twitter, X.com, as well as Facebook and Instagram. We are actually over on the Instagrams now, and we've been getting some good traction with the reels. Yeah, I'll do the Instagrams. You do the Facebooks. I'll do the Instagrams.
Facebooks, that's right.
Yeah, I love it. Folks, with that being said, in terms of the show, if you want to go ahead and find the show wherever it is that you didn't find it today. So if you're watching us on video, that means you're finding us on YouTube, Rumble, or over on X.com or Facebook, where we air the entire video versions of the show. If you are joining us here today, thank you. Hit that subscribe button, little notification bell, and of course, head down below into the comments after you hit the like button. We want to hear what your thoughts are. If you are on the more, pro 2A side of the aisle, let us know, did we make a good argument today? And if you're on the anti 2A side of the aisle, where do you think we got it wrong? We want to hear your thoughts. Continue the conversation down below. Or heck, if you are listening to the show via the confines of your earbuds while you're working out at the gym, driving to work, I hope you're not wearing earbuds if you're driving to work. But with that, if you are listening to the podcast version of the show, that means you found us on your favorite podcast app. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music. I use Podcast Addict. I know there's a bunch of them out there. So wherever that is, do me another favor. Hit that subscribe button once again, but also hit download all unplayed episodes. Reason being, Carrie is not episode 1, believe it or not, of the Brian Nichols Show. She's actually episode 836, 830.
You waited this long to have me on?
I know. Shame on me. Shame on me. But we did make it, Carrie. We did make it this long, which means that we have in the archives quite literally hundreds of episodes with hundreds of guests that have been pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. So head down into those show notes, click the link to go to briannicholsshow.com, where you're going to find all 830 plus episodes. And like I said, if you're listening to us on the podcasts, hit download all unplayed episodes, start episode 1 in 2018, fast forward to where we are today in 2014, 2024. And I guarantee a few episodes should leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. With that being said, it's been an absolute pleasure. I almost forgot one last thing, Carrie, and that is for folks to please support the folks who support us, and that is our amazing sponsors. So yes, Carrie, I think you are also part of AMP America as well. So please go ahead and support the amazing organization that is AMP America, but also support the other folks who support us, like Cardio Miracle. We have the Wellness Company, really excited to have them as a sponsor here in the show. We also have our amazing sponsors over at Ebles CBD and Liquid Freedom Energy Tea, which I gotta say, I just got a new shipment of Liquid Freedom Energy Tea in for my good friend Dan Berman, and it's the best. It's truly the best energy drink I've ever used. All the other ones had just toxic ingredients in them. No thanks. I want the natural good for you stuff. So if you guys are looking for a great replacement to your Monster, Red Bulls, all those other energy drinks out there, Liquid Freedom Energy Tea. Can't promote it enough. Link in the show notes. Carrie, any final words for us today?
just make sure that you understand that women look at firearms differently than men. And if we want to arm the women with education, confidence, and self-defense, we have to change our approach and help women understand that their lives are worth defending, then teach them how to defend that life with the most effective self-defense tool available to them, a firearm.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that men and women are different? Carrie, you're just starting a whole different conversation that we need to dig into. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm no biologist, but girls have a vagina. Oh, was that boys have a penis and girls have a vagina?
Good old kindergarten cop. That's right. All right, we're going to end there. Kerry Slone signing off here in the Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you next time. Oh, wait, no. Brian Nichols signing off here in the Brian Nichols Show for Kerry Slone. There we go. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.